Lena, a sharp-witted teenager with a knack for noticing the unusual, was the first to notice the distress signal. She saw a girl about her age frantically signaling from a nearby car. She approached the bus driver, who was initially skeptical. He glanced in the rearview mirror, and the color drained from his face as he too recognized the distress signal. With no time to lose, he made a split-second decision that could change the fate of the unknown girl. Lena's gaze was locked onto the rear window of the blue car as it zigzagged through traffic. Her heart hammered against her ribcage, the SOS signals she had seen clear as day in her mind. She leaned closer to the bus driver, urging him to keep the car in sight. "Please, it's important," she insisted, her eyes never leaving the vehicle as it took a sudden turn down a less traveled road. The bus driver frowned, his skepticism apparent. "Look, kid, I don't want to get involved in anything," he began, but the fear in Lena's voice cut him off. "Just follow for a few minutes, please. I have a really bad feeling about this," she pleaded. With a reluctant grunt, the driver accelerated slightly, keeping a cautious distance from the car. Passengers murmured among themselves, casting curious glances at Lena, and then quickly back to their phones and books. Lena ignored them. Her sharp focus remained on the vehicle. The car slowed, and the girl in the back seat looked directly at Lena, her eyes wide with fear. The message was clear. She was desperately pleading for help. As the bus trailed the car into the suburbs, Lena's mind raced. What could she possibly do next? Should she call the police? But what would she say? Her thoughts were interrupted as the vehicle pulled into the driveway of a quiet, unassuming house. The girl in the car glanced around frantically, then disappeared from sight as the car door opened. "Here, this is as far as I go," the driver announced, stopping the bus with a hiss at the nearest stop. Lena hesitated, then darted off the bus quickly, her decision made. She couldn't leave the girl alone in whatever trouble she was in. Sneaking closer to the house, she hid behind a nearby tree, watching as the front door closed behind the girl and her apparent captor. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the only sounds the distant bark of a dog and the soft rustling of leaves. Lena took out her phone, her fingers hovering over the emergency call button. She paused, thinking. Evidence. She needed evidence. Quietly, she crept closer, her phone ready to capture anything unusual. Peering through the living room window, Lena could see the girl arguing with a middle-aged woman. The conversation seemed heated, though the glass muffled their voices. Lena strained to listen, catching bits of phrases like "not safe" and "must leave." What was happening inside that house? Suddenly the curtains snapped shut, and Lena ducked down, her heart in her throat. Had they seen her? She waited, holding her breath, until the silence reassured her that she hadn't been caught. Glancing around, she noted other houses nearby, people who could potentially help, or at least be witnesses. Lena needed a plan, and fast. Her deliberation was cut short by the sound of sirens in the distance. Panic surged through her. Had someone else called the police, or was it unrelated to the girl in the house? Either way, the too early arrival of the police could complicate things. She needed to act quickly, but carefully, balancing her urge to rescue the girl with the need to avoid any reckless mistakes. Lena made her decision. She would approach the neighbors. Maybe they knew something about the people living in the house, or had noticed any unusual activities. She moved to the next door and rang the bell, rehearsing her questions in her mind. As the door creaked open, she took a deep breath, ready to delve deeper into the mystery. At the slightly open door, Lena paused, her hand hovering. Pushing it open gently, she peered inside, her voice catching slightly as she called out, "Hello?" The house echoed back at her, the smell of must and old wood mingling in the air. She stepped in just enough to see the hallway stretch out dimly before her, pictures lining the walls, watching her as she waited for any sign of life. The door creaked further open, and an elderly woman appeared, peeking around the edge. Her eyes, lined with years of wisdom, fixed on Lena. "Yes? What do you want?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and caution. Lena flashed a nervous smile. "I'm sorry to disturb you. I just moved nearby and thought I'd introduce myself and learn a bit about the neighborhood." Lena leaned against the doorframe, trying to seem nonchalant. "This house seems interesting. Has it been in your family long?" she asked, glancing around at the visible parts of the house. The woman hesitated, then relaxed slightly. "A few decades, yes. Why do you ask?" Lena shrugged. "Just trying to connect with my new neighbors, hear their stories. Makes a place feel more like home, you know." The woman narrowed her eyes slightly, studying Lena. "Most people don't bother much with old tales," she remarked, a hint of suspicion in her tone. "What's really bringing you here?" Lena kept her expression light, but inside, her anxiety ticked up. She needed to tread carefully, the truth too risky to reveal. "Honestly, I just enjoy history. Always have," she lied, hoping it sounded convincing enough. "History, huh?" The woman mulled over Lena's words, then abruptly nodded towards the street. "Well, I think you've got enough history for today," she said, her tone final. Before Lena could respond, the door was shut firmly in her face. Staring at the closed door, Lena's resolve hardened. No answers here, but maybe the next house would be different. She stepped back, squaring her shoulders for the next attempt. With the door slamming shut behind her, Lena stood momentarily stunned. She blinked away the sting of rejection, shook her head to clear it, and moved towards the next house. Her steps quickened with determination, the gravel crunching softly under her shoes. "No looking back," she murmured to herself, adjusting her backpack as she approached the next door, her knuckles rapping firmly against the wood. Lena's afternoon turned into a methodical sequence of knocks. At each door, she greeted the resident with a hopeful smile, asking about the blue house and its mysterious occupants. Some answered in brief nods or shrugs, others with a polite, "Sorry, can't really say." Each interaction left her with little more than the last, her notebook remaining distressingly empty of useful information. One after another, the neighbors' faces blended into a pattern of indifference. "Never really see anyone there," one muttered, closing the door gently. Another just shook his head. "Don't know anything about them." Lena's questions seemed to bounce off an invisible wall of apathy, her frustration simmering as she walked from one house to the next. The same answer echoed each time: ignorance. With each fruitless encounter, Lena felt her spirits wane. Her initial resolve was now fraying at the edges, the repeated rejections turning her brisk walk into a slow trudge. "Why won't anyone say anything real?" she whispered to herself, feeling the weight of an unseen barrier that kept everyone tight-lipped. Each shrugged shoulder and averted gaze added layers to the mystery, deepening her resolve to find the truth. Reaching the end of the block, Lena stopped and leaned against a lamppost, exhaustion seeping into her bones. She looked back down the street, the row of houses staring back uniformly silent, their windows like eyes that wouldn't meet hers. A sigh escaped her lips. "What now?" she asked the empty air, her gaze drifting to the ground, unsure of her next move in this increasingly puzzling endeavor. Lost in her thoughts of defeat, Lena barely registered the sound until her name, called out distinctly from behind, snapped her to attention. She turned to see a figure jogging toward her, his features becoming clearer with each step. It was John, the bus driver, his face etched with concern. Surprise flickered across Lena's face as she waited for him to catch up, her heart lifting slightly with the unexpected recognition. John finally reached her, panting slightly. "Lena, I saw you walking from my route. Everything okay?" His brow furrowed as he looked her over, as if checking for signs of distress. Lena shook her head, her worries briefly forgotten in the face of his unexpected kindness. "I've been better," Honestly, just trying to figure out a mystery, she admitted, offering him a wry smile. I couldn't stop thinking about that girl we saw, John confessed, his voice low. Those SOS signals, they've been haunting me all day. I needed to do something. His eyes met Lena's, filled with a mix of resolve and worry. Lena nodded, her own resolve reigniting at his words. I feel the same. It's like we were meant to see it, she responded, the shared concern forging a sudden, strong bond. So, what's the plan? John asked, his stance suggesting readiness for action. Lena bit her lip, thinking. I tried asking around, but hit dead ends everywhere. No one seems to know, or they aren't telling. John's jaw set. Let's go back together then. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Relief and gratitude filled Lena, knowing she no longer had to face this alone. Thanks, John. Really, she murmured. With a nod from John, they started back toward the house. The afternoon sun cast long shadows on the sidewalk, mirroring the growing anticipation between them. We need to be sneaky about this, Lena whispered, her eyes scanning for any unwanted attention. John nodded in agreement, his presence comforting. They moved with purpose, each step taking them closer to uncovering the truth hidden within the walls of the mysterious house. Lena and John crept toward the house, their steps soft against the crunchy gravel. Reaching the first window, they exchanged a glance before peering through the slightly grimy glass. The interior was dimly lit, casting long shadows across what looked like a cluttered living room. They moved slowly along the side of the house, careful to stay out of sight, each window offering them a fragmented view of the life inside. At the rear window, they paused. Inside, the girl they had seen earlier was sitting at a table, her expression one of distress. She was not alone. 2 figures, a man and a woman, sat across from her, their backs to the window. None of them seemed aware of Lena and John's anxious eyes, observing quietly from the darkness outside. John shifted uncomfortably, whispering, "Maybe we should call the cops." His voice was laced with concern, the gravity of the situation pressing down on him. Lena chewed her lip, her eyes fixed on the girl. "I know, but what if that makes things worse for her?" she murmured back, her gaze torn between the girl and John's earnest expression. Lena's mind raced as she considered their options. "If we call now, we might scare them off. Or worse," she whispered, her voice barely audible. John nodded slowly, his face a mask of worry. "You're right, but doing nothing feels wrong too," he replied, his hands clenched into fists. The tension between taking immediate action and waiting hung heavily in the air. Finally, they decided to hold off on calling the police. "Let's just watch a little longer, try to understand what's happening," Lena suggested, her eyes not leaving the window. John agreed reluctantly, his gaze shifting back to the dim figures inside the house. They settled into a watchful silence, hoping for a clearer understanding that would guide their next move without escalating the danger inside. The muffled sound of shouting suddenly broke through the quiet, causing Lena and John to flinch. Clearer than before, the girls' cries pierced the evening air, sounding both urgent and frightened. "We can't just stand here," Lena whispered, her voice thick with worry. John put a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his own face lined with concern as they listened, the gravity of the situation settling heavily between them. "I get it, Lena. We can't rush this," John said quietly, understanding her hesitation. "A bad call could make things worse for her." Lena nodded, her eyes never leaving the shadowed window of the house. "Exactly. We need a solid plan, not a panic move." They stood together, the decision to avoid a hasty police call weighing on them as they strained to hear more from inside the house. The urgency in the girls' cries underscored the need for quick thinking. "We have to do something soon, John. We can't let this go on," Lena said, her voice firm yet tinged with frustration. John looked around, his mind racing. Let's think this through. There must be a way to help her without just barging in. They mulled over their limited options, each aware that time was slipping away. The tension between caution and action grew as they continued to listen. Each shout from the house tugged at Lena's instincts to rush in. "It's hard to stand back," she confessed, biting her lip. John's face mirrored her conflict. "I know, but we can't mess this up. We have to be smart, Lena." Their conversation was a low, tense exchange, balancing the need to act with the imperative to remain prudent. As they stood, the girl's sobbing grew louder, a stark reminder of the stakes at hand. "We need evidence, anything solid we can use," Lena decided, her resolve hardening with each cry. John nodded, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of what to do next. "Right, let's gather what we can and then decide our next move carefully," he agreed. They knew they had to build their case before stepping forward. Lena moved with silent purpose, crouching near the parked car. She quickly snapped photos of the license plate and the vehicle's make and model. Every click of the camera felt like a step closer to unraveling the mystery. Glancing around to ensure no one was watching, she captured a few more shots of the car's position relative to the house, storing potential evidence in her phone. Next, Lena circled the house, taking pictures from various angles. She documented each window, the front door, and any unusual details that might prove crucial later. Her phone camera clicked steadily, capturing the fading light's play on the dusty windows and the overgrown garden that seemed to swallow the lower half of the house in shadows and mystery. John kept watch while Lena worked, then took his turn with the camera. He aimed it through the least obstructed windows, trying to get clear interior shots without alerting anyone inside. His hands were steady as he focused on capturing the scene inside, the digital zoom revealing more than their eyes could from their hidden spot in the shadows. Time was slipping away as the sky darkened, but Lena and John worked with a practiced efficiency born of urgent necessity. They communicated with gestures and whispers, coordinating their efforts to cover all bases. "Got it?" Lena asked in a hushed tone. "Yeah, all clear here," John whispered back, checking the photos on his phone one last time to ensure they were usable. With their collection of images secured, Lena and John stepped back to assess their next move. "We have enough to show the police now," Lena confirmed, scrolling through the photos. John nodded, his expression grave but determined. "Let's find a safe spot to make the call," he suggested, and they moved off, ready to take the final step in their improvised investigation. Lena and John found a secluded spot across the street, hidden behind a tall hedge. From here, they could keep an eye on the house while staying out of sight. John pulled out his phone, ready to dial, while Lena kept her eyes fixed on the dark windows of the house, watching for any sign of movement. John spoke in hushed tones into the phone, his voice urgent yet controlled. "We need someone to check this out, but it's got to be discreet," he stressed, glancing towards Lena for affirmation. She nodded, her expression tense as she continued to scan the house. Their voices were low, blending into the rustling leaves around them as they urged the need for a careful approach. While John relayed their findings to the dispatcher, Lena's gaze remained locked on the house. Her hands were clenched tightly around her phone, ready to call out if anything changed. Every shadow seemed to move, every light flicker made her heart skip, but she stayed alert, determined not to miss anything that could be crucial. Details shared. "Yes, we have photos and a license plate number," John continued, providing all the specifics they had collected. He described the car, the people they saw, and the behavior that raised their suspicions. "Please, we need someone here quickly but quietly," he added, his voice a whisper of desperation. Lena listened, her body tense with anticipation, hoping their efforts would prompt the right kind of response. After ending the call, they settled back into their hidden spot, their eyes never straying from the house. Both felt the weight of the situation bearing down as they waited for the police to arrive. The silence around them was heavy, filled with the distant sounds of the night and their own rapid heartbeats. "They'll be here soon," John murmured, more to reassure himself than Lena. The quiet of the night was abruptly shattered by a crescendo of thuds and shouts coming from the house. Lena's head whipped towards the noise, her eyes wide with alarm. John gripped her arm, his own expression mirroring her shock. The sounds of a struggle were unmistakable now, each crash and raised voice slicing through the calm, pushing the tension between them to a new height. Lena and John locked eyes, each reading the other's resolve in an instant. Without a word, they knew. Waiting was no longer an option. "We have to go now," Lena whispered, urgency lacing her voice. John nodded sharply, the decision firm between them. They couldn't stand by while the situation inside escalated dangerously. With a quick, mutual nod, they abandoned their initial plan of waiting for the police. The immediate crisis inside the house demanded action, not patience. They moved quickly, dodging shadows and keeping low to the ground as they approached the house, driven by the imperative to intervene before it was too late. Their steps were quiet against the gravel as they edged closer to the front door. Adrenaline surged through Lena, her heart pounding in her ears. John moved with equal caution, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement inside the house. Every nerve was on alert as they prepared for what might come next. As they neared the door, the muffled sounds of distress grew louder, more urgent. Each shout and bang propelled them forward faster, their readiness peaking. Lena's breaths came quick and shallow, her mind focused only on the task ahead. John kept pace, his determination clear in the set of his jaw and the alertness of his gaze. At the front door, John quickly scanned the ground and picked up a hefty branch, stripping it of smaller twigs. He hefted it, testing its weight, then nodded to himself, satisfied it could serve as a makeshift weapon. Lena watched him, her anxiety mixing with a surge of resolve. They were not just observers anymore. They were stepping into the fray, prepared to protect themselves and the girl inside. John turned to Lena, holding up one hand and silently ticking off 3 fingers to coordinate their move. Lena positioned herself by the door, her muscles tensed for action. John's gaze was focused, his finger dropping with each silent count, their breaths held in sync. The quiet before the storm was palpable as they readied themselves for what was to come. On the silent count of 3, Lena's leg shot out, her boot connecting with the door with a resounding thud. The door flew open, banging against the wall inside, the sudden noise startlingly loud in the quiet house. They paused for a fraction of a second, listening for any reaction to their abrupt entrance, hearts pounding in the sudden silence that followed the echo. Without hesitation, John charged into the house, branch raised and ready to confront whatever awaited them. His figure was tense but determined as he swept into the dimly lit living room, every sense heightened, prepared to use his makeshift weapon if necessary. Lena lingered at the doorway for a split second, watching him take the lead. Lena quickly stepped in behind John, her phone held up in front of her, ready to record. Her eyes darted around the interior, seeking out any immediate threats or the girl they were there to protect. Each sound heightened her alertness as she followed John's lead, ready to document what unfolded next in their daring intervention. Inside the dim room, John's voice boomed. "Everyone back off!" He waved the branch authoritatively, his stance wide and commanding. The few people inside froze, their attention snapping to him and the branch he wielded. The girl, momentarily forgotten, looked up with a startled expression, her eyes wide as she assessed the sudden shift in her predicament. Lena stepped beside John, her phone prominently displaying the dialed emergency call. She held it up for the room to see, reinforcing their serious intent. "Police are on their way," she stated firmly, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. The assailants glanced at the glowing screen, the reality of the threat dawning on them as they weighed their options. Voices raised in confusion and anger as the room erupted into shouts. Someone yelled for calm, another voice protested innocence. The tension was a thick cloud in the air, every shout adding to the chaos that teetered dangerously close to violence. Lena and John stood their ground, united in their resolve to keep the situation from spiraling out of control. Suddenly, the flashing blue and red lights of police cars pierced the room's windows, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Relief mixed with apprehension filled Lena as she glanced outside, seeing officers quickly disembarking and approaching the house. Their timely arrival felt like a reprieve, but the night was far from over. As the police entered, the chaos began to subside. John lowered the branch, stepping aside to let the officers take control. Lena quickly started explaining their actions, showing the officers her phone and the photos they had taken. "We thought she was in danger," she explained, her voice earnest as she recounted their decision to intervene. The officers listened, their expressions unreadable as they assessed the scene. The officers quickly clarified the situation, revealing the girl was actually an actress rehearsing for a film. The supposed captors were fellow actors, practicing a dramatic scene. John and Lena exchanged bewildered glances, the tension draining from their bodies as they absorbed the bizarre truth. The girl, still in character, apologized for any fright they might have experienced, explaining the realism they aimed for in their performance. As the reality of the misunderstanding unfolded, a mix of relief and embarrassment washed over Lena and John. The police officers gently explained that no harm was intended, and the dramatics were all part of an act. Laughter began to replace tension among the group, and sheepish grins spread around the room as everyone started to see the lighter side of the confusion. Despite the awkward mix-up, news of Lena's decisive actions spread, earning her widespread admiration for her vigilance. Community members praised her bravery and quick thinking. Conversations ignited about the importance of being observant and proactive, with many citing Lena's intervention as a powerful example of community care in action, even if this time it was a false alarm. Lena became a celebrated figure in her community, her story quickly spreading across social media. Posts praised her bravery and the lesson in courage she provided. Interviews and community talks followed, where Lena shared her experience, emphasizing the importance of looking out for one another. Her accidental heroism turned into a rallying cry for community vigilance, inspiring others to take action in their own neighborhoods. Transformed by the incident, Lena took on a new role as an advocate for safety and preparedness. She collaborated with local law enforcement to host safety workshops, her story serving as a cornerstone for discussions on preventive action and community support. Lena's accidental heroism not only made her a local hero, but sparked a dedicated cause, changing her life and potentially the lives of others in her community. Did you like this touching and surprising story? If so, we invite you to leave us a comment expressing your opinion. If you want to continue enjoying inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel or check out the other videos shown at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for your cooperation,